Module is entitled Fourfold Path to End Crime Against Women. The objectives of this module are to understand some basic elements of the philosophy of security, and some aspects of Buddhism will be used to interpret that. The module was written by Garima Goswami, an independent research scholar in New Delhi. I'm Akash Singh Rathore from the Lewis University of Rome. Violence against women in the Indian national capital has seen a very heinous incarnation in the year 2012 with the case that has come to be known as the Nirbhaya rape case. We're going to discuss this case in order to understand certain aspects of criminal behavior, or that branch of jurisprudence known as criminal justice. We're going to use some concepts from Buddhism in a manner that will help us to interpret methodologically these ideas from criminal justice. So let's begin with the Four Noble Truths. In Buddhism, we have all learned about the Four Noble Truths that state, in the first place, that there is suffering. Secondly, that there's a cause for suffering. Thirdly, that there's a cessation of suffering. And fourthly, that there is a path that leads to this cessation of suffering. Now, analogically, we can understand crime in this fourfold manner. There is crime, there's a cause of crime, there's a cessation of crime, and then there's a path which leads to the cessation of crime. The object of criminal justice, conceived in its philosophical side, is to attempt to understand the nature and causes of crime in order to lead eventually towards the cessation of crime, and to understand thereby certain theories and principles that can be exploited as that path to the cessation of crime. Let's begin with the first. There is crime, and in this we are referring to the Nirbhaya rape case. So what are the facts of this case? In South Delhi in mid-December 2012, there was a gang rape that occurred. A male and female, two friends, had just seen a film at a theater in South Delhi, and they boarded a private bus that they assumed to be heading towards their residence in North Delhi. The bus was not actually legally mandated to ply in the streets of Delhi, and the people who were in it were actually just drinking, robbing people, and having a party. In fact, prior to the gang rape, this group of people on the bus had already picked up a particular common laborer in Delhi, claiming that they would give him a ride for the 10 rupees ticket, and after he boarded the bus, they beat him and robbed him of 8,000 rupees and then threw him out of the bus. The fact that this crime had occurred earlier will become relevant to us later as we understand some of the principles that are involved here. So the male and female boarded the bus. The male friend was subsequently harassed by the men on the bus, and they started to beat him. The woman intervened, and after beating the boy almost unconscious and moving his body to the back of the bus, they proceeded to rape the woman in a quite heinous way, using a metal tire iron to penetrate her and consequently disemboweling her, and then throwing her disemboweled body off of the bus along with the beaten friend. So the nature of this rape is particularly violent, and the manner in which it was conducted was a manner that prevented detection, since the vehicle was moving. Now, it's interesting to note that this moving van actually passed by no fewer than 3 Delhi police checking vehicles, what are referred to as control vans. This will also become important later when we discuss the criminal justice side of this. So there is crime. We've covered that. We've covered what the crime was, and we've described certain details. Of course, the details are gruesome and plentiful, but we're only going to discuss those aspects of it that are relevant to understand the next steps that we're trying to achieve. So let's move on to the next step. There is a cause of crime. Now, criminal justice cannot grant us access to the criminal mind. However, what it can do is tell us the conditions, the objective or circumstantial conditions that allow a criminal to actively engage in some sort of criminality. Now, how do we determine what those objective factors are? Well, if I were a criminal, it would be important for me, above all, that my crime is not detected. If my crime were detected, that there should be a delay in my arrest or prosecution. Now, if I am arrested or prosecuted, I should choose a crime where there's a minimal loss to me as a result of that arrest or prosecution. And finally, if I am prosecuted, I would still like to be able to find some sort of social support despite my prosecution. I've mentioned 4 terms: detection, that my crime should not be detected; delay, that if detected there should be delay in my arrest; deterrence, in other words, I should choose a crime where there's a minimal loss to me in the event of prosecution, so in that sense a lack of deterrence; and then response. If I am prosecuted and imprisoned, then I should still hope to find something of a weak response or antagonism to the crime that I had committed. So the philosophy of security has as its fundamental principles this notion of detection, delay, deterrence, and response. And to understand these 4 elements of the philosophy of security, we can, in some respects, understand the theoretical side of criminal justice as a subdiscipline of jurisprudence. So let's discuss these principles one at a time in relationship to the case at hand and in relationship to other cases. Now, I had mentioned that the case occurred in a moving van. There's something fundamentally useful for a criminal in this kind of operation, because the detection of the crime is difficult. There are no witnesses. It doesn't happen in public. Those witnesses who are there can be, like the friend of the woman who was raped, can be beaten, robbed, their phone and their identity documents removed, and so on. All of these things aid in preventing detection. Delay is another interesting side to this. If my crime is detected, it's in my interest that there should be a delay in the response. And within the National Capital Region of Delhi, the delay that is present in the prosecution or investigation or arrest of assailants or suspected criminals is notoriously long. For example, in the year 2013, there were 700 reported crimes against women, and as of January 2014, only 4 of those had been investigated. So the delay allows the criminal the opportunity, affords the criminal the opportunity to pursue further crimes in the period between the original crime and the eventual arrest, if there is ever any arrest. There's a common principle of natural justice which runs, justice delayed is justice denied. And this principle is crucially integrated into this conception of criminal justice, that the aspect of delay is one of the preconditions that allows crime to flourish. So we've discussed detection and we've discussed delay. An element of this is important to understand the cause of crime. If there is no detection, if there is no immediate response to that detection, so if there is delay, it allows crime to flourish. There are some crucial empirical details that we know from studying crime against women in Delhi that lead to the conclusion that there have not been adequate responses to the problem of detection and the problem of delay. As I had mentioned, this moving van had passed no fewer than 3 police checkpoints. These checkpoints are there in order to detect crime. The very fact that one of the most heinous possible crimes occurred and passed 3 checkpoints tells us that we have a serious problem with the detection methods. Another way that criminals avoid detection is by the victims that they choose. So most of the victims of rape are children under the age of 18, and on the other hand, in the National Capital Region, more than 25% are women from the northeastern region. Why these 2 populations? Obviously, detection and delay are crucial elements in understanding why these 2 particular populations are chosen. When a rapist attacks a child, it's easy for the rapist to prevent detection of the crime by threatening the parents of the child or by threatening the child, him or herself. In the case of the Northeasterners, what we find is that the element of both detection and delay is exploited by the assailant. For example, in Bangalore, there was a crime ring of gang rapists who systematically would surveil Northeastern women working in multinational corporations in Bangalore for 2 or 3 days to see how they lived, where they lived. And when they found a Northeasterner who had no family support in the city of Bangalore and generally lived alone in a paying guest house, they realized that she was an easy victim, a victim who could not be, about whom the crime could not be easily detected, and if detected, there would be quite an enormous delay in the investigation, arrest, or prosecution. The reason for this is that Northeastern single women in a city like Bangalore or Delhi have no social support system. They live alone. They have no one to turn to in case of help. And there are also language barriers in the event that they do try to report the case. One study showed that these victims of rape in the National Capital Region, when they go to report what happened to them in Delhi, the lack of fluency in Hindi, or on the other hand, the lack of the police's ability to understand English prevents a great number of these cases from being taken up and FIRs from being filed. In the case of Bangalore, the gang would video record the rape, showing the victim's face on camera and the explicit sexual acts, and then would inform the Northeastern women victims that if they reported the crime, then these videos would be uploaded and their families would be shamed, of course, to see the sexual transgressions of the woman. So in all of these cases, what we have is the vulnerability of the victim. So the children are particularly vulnerable. The northeastern women outside of their home states are particularly vulnerable because they have no social support. Vulnerability then is exploited to prevent detection and to promote or increase delay in addressing the crime. So now we move on to deterrence. In the case of deterrence, generally the criminal believes that if he is caught, the prosecution will be slow and not swift and not very severe. In order to deter the criminal from engaging in the crime, deterrence is a crucial factor in the criminal's deliberations over whether to engage in criminal activity or not. Considering that the likelihood of arrest and prosecution in the National Capital Region for the crime of rape is somewhere less than 10%, it certainly doesn't deter people from engaging in that sort of criminal activity. When we've already established that detection is difficult because we've chosen a vulnerable population, that there is an enormous amount of delay that allows me to continue my criminal behavior with impunity, when we factor in as well that there is very little deterrence, in other words, very low conviction rate, very low rate of imprisonment, then we have created very clearly the foundation for a proliferation of this sort of criminal activity. So the vantage point of criminal justice suggests that while we don't know why it is internally that people commit these sorts of crimes, or we don't necessarily even need to know, what we do know is that there are external objective factors which not only permit people to engage in this kind of criminal activity, but even encourage it in a certain respect. It's encouraged because there is lack of detection, lack of delay, and lack of deterrence. We move on to the third principle, that there's a cessation of crime, just as we had said in the fourfold path that there's a cessation of suffering. This cessation of crime within criminal justice is referred to as risk mitigation. Now, the Nirbhaya case led to certain steps towards a cessation of crime. Obviously, there was a nationwide outcry, in fact, an international a series of protests, some of them violent, like the ones in Delhi, the ones at JNU campus, the ones in Bangalore. And this pressurized the government to take certain remedial steps in response to the rape case. We've discussed in the module on consensus the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 2013, which was enacted, and you can refer to that module in order to see a number of the provisions of the Criminal Law Amendment Act. Here, we're just going to point out that 6 fast-track courts were formed. The reason I want to point this out is the very nature of a fast-track court helps to address the problem of delay that we had mentioned. Another consequence of the case was that the Sexual Harassment Act of Women in the Workplace was also passed in 2013. So what we're seeing here are steps towards response. These responses are addressing the issues of detection, the issues of delay, and the issues of deterrence. So the new amendment has increased the kind of penalties that would be meted out to criminals. It has addressed some of the procedural delays that have always plagued the legal system in Delhi in particular, and it has attempted to introduce more responsibility for those control vans, for example, that patrol in Delhi, to ensure that the deterrence is more prompt and adequate. So what we get overall is that the correct response to this set of environmental factors that not only can be seen as the cause of crime, but also seen as promoting criminality. The culmination of these is the path that leads to the cessation of crime. And this we refer to within the philosophy of security as response. So the path which can really pave the way to cessation of this particular type of crime against women, is of course the appropriate response. Now that response is divided into two considerations, one the legal and political, and one the social. As for the legal and political response, thankfully, certain amendments have been introduced that serve to correct a lot of the defects that lead to an environment where this crime can become rampant. But what about the social response? Well, as we discussed also in the module on consent, we continue to have a culture of victim blaming, and we continue to have a social norm permitting us to speak to the defects of the victim and place the burden on the victim as opposed to addressing the defects of the assailants. One clear case of this is the common misperception that women who are raped were in some way dressed provocatively or behaving in a provocative manner. Considering that 56% of the women who are raped, or the females who are raped, are school-aged children or women above the age of 40, it's hard to see that these are the two demographics who dress provocatively. So already we see that it's something of a ridiculous suggestion that rape is caused by provocative dress, since the majority of rape is perpetrated against people who demographically just empirically don't dress provocatively. But the attitude that we can in some way relieve the burden of the criminal assailant and place that burden onto the victim is clearly one of the responses that is completely inadequate and perpetuates the possibility of criminality. So even if we address issues of detection, delay, and increased deterrence, unless the response on the side of society does not match up with the kind of adequate legal and political response, then we will never follow that path that leads to the cessation of this kind of criminality. So, in conclusion, the Buddhist Four Noble Truths can help to explain why crimes occur and also help develop a method to curb crime. For what is crime if not suffering? Liberation from this would be to live in a world free of such crimes. Now, that's something of a utopian idea, but the virtues of the philosophy of security is to translate this kind of utopian ideal that we would like to live in a world free of crime into concrete steps that we can take that we know empirically do decrease the possibility and the occurrences of crime. And that is to incorporate the basic principles of the philosophy of security into both the legal and political system and hopefully someday also the social system. Thank you.